She arrived blind and mute for her mail-order wedding. What the Cheyenne rider did shocked everyone. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's begin the story. As Dakotah guided Alice through the snowy Cheyenne camp, a sense of calm began to settle over her. The harsh winds of the open plains had started to fade, replaced by the quiet sounds of crackling fires and murmurs from the camp's inhabitants. The people here were unlike any Alice had ever encountered, strong, stoic, yet unafraid to show a quiet kindness in the way they looked at her. Though she could not speak or see, she felt it. The unspoken understanding that the Cheyenne were a people who respected strength, not only in battle, but in survival. As Dakotah led her towards a small, modest tent at the far edge of the camp, he motioned for her to sit by a fire that had been carefully tended. The warmth of the fire was a stark contrast to the chill that had clung to her for so long, and for the first time in days, Alice felt a sense of safety. Dakotah knelt beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. He didn't need words to convey the message. He wasn't here to judge her, nor to pity her. He was here to help. Dakotah's actions spoke louder than anything Alice had heard in her entire life. She had always been told she was less than others. Her blindness and muteness had made her a burden in the eyes of many. But here, in this camp, with these strangers who had no reason to be kind to her, she was being treated with respect. Dakotah, without a single word of sympathy, had chosen to protect her, to give her a chance to start over. She didn't know why he had chosen her, but in her heart, she felt an unspoken bond form between them. Days passed, and Dakotah continued to care for Alice, ensuring that she had everything she needed. He didn't coddle her, but instead, he treated her as an equal. He helped her find ways to communicate, teaching her how to understand the world around her through touch, smell, and the vibrations of the earth beneath her feet. The camp was no stranger to hardship, and Dakotah knew that survival required more than just strength. It required adaptability, a willingness to learn from the world, and the courage to accept help when it was needed. Alice, for the first time, understood this. She had spent so long being told that she was incapable of living a full life, that she was a burden. But Dakotah had shown her that there was more to life than what others saw in her limitations. She had begun to see herself not as the girl who had been abandoned, but as a person who had the ability to learn, to grow, and to adapt to a world that had always felt so distant. One afternoon, as Dakotah returned to the camp from a scouting trip, Alice was waiting for him near the edge of the camp. Her hands were steady as she gripped the smooth, worn staff that Dakotah had given her. It was a symbol of her place in this world now, a connection to a tribe that had accepted her despite her past. Dakotah smiled faintly when he saw her. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. He had seen her transformation, and he knew that she was no longer the fragile, helpless woman who had arrived weeks ago. She had found strength within herself, and it was something no one could take from her. He approached her slowly, his eyes not focused on her blindness, but on the determination that now radiated from her. Dakotah stopped in front of her and placed his hand on her shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of her progress. Alice felt the warmth of his touch, and in that moment, she knew that her journey with the Cheyenne was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, but she no longer feared them. She had found something more powerful than the life she had been given. She had found herself. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, Alice began to adapt more to her new life within the Cheyenne camp. Dakotah, the man who had become her protector, never stopped guiding her. He was patient with her, teaching her not just survival skills, but the deeper wisdom of the Cheyenne people. He knew that her transformation was not just about learning to live in this new world. It was about finding her inner strength and learning to believe in her own worth. Alice's connection to the Cheyenne grew deeper each day. She was no longer just the abandoned, blind, and mute woman who had been sold off in a mail-order marriage. She was Alice, a person with a future. As Dakotah taught her to read the vibrations of the earth, to listen to the rhythm of the wind, and to recognize the subtle sounds of the wild animals around the camp, Alice started to feel a sense of purpose. No longer trapped in silence and darkness, she learned to navigate the world in a way she had never dreamed possible. The community, which had once regarded her as an outsider, now began to see her as one of their own. They admired her resilience, her ability to adapt to a life so vastly different from what she had known. The Cheyenne, known for their strength and resilience, saw in Alice a reflection of their own values. One evening, as the sun began to set behind the distant mountains, Dakotah called Alice over to the campfire. He had gathered the elders of the tribe, and a deep sense of anticipation filled the air. As Alice approached, she could feel the presence of those watching her, but there was no judgment in their eyes, only curiosity and respect. Dakotah smiled faintly as she sat down beside him. He looked into her eyes, sensing the quiet strength that had blossomed in her since her arrival. "Tonight, we honor you," Dakotah said, his voice calm but powerful. "You have proven your strength and your spirit, Alice. You are no longer a stranger among us." The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the faces of the elders. They nodded in agreement, and one by one, they shared their thoughts on Alice's journey. She had shown bravery, courage, and a willingness to learn when others might have turned away. They spoke of how she had not only adapted but had become a source of inspiration to the younger members of the tribe, teaching them that strength was not just about physical ability, but about the courage to keep moving forward, no matter the obstacles. Dakotah then stood, and the tribe fell silent. He raised his hand, signaling for Alice to join him at the center of the firelight. "We give you a new name," he said, his voice echoing across the quiet camp. "From this day forward, you will be known as Wiaya, meaning the one who overcomes. It is a name that reflects your journey, your strength, and the way you have overcome all that life has thrown at you." Alice stood still, feeling the weight of the moment. She didn't need to see the people around her to know that they were accepting her, fully and without hesitation. She had found her place among them, not just as a woman who had been saved, but as a woman who had chosen to fight for her future, to adapt and grow. The fire crackled again, and Alice felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. This was her home now. As the night grew darker and the stars began to fill the sky above, Dakotah pulled Alice aside. He spoke quietly, so only she could hear. "You have become a part of this tribe, Alice, and I will always be here for you. But remember, your strength does not come from others. It comes from within you. You are more powerful than you realize." Alice nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had no words to offer in return, but in that moment, Dakotah understood. They had shared a bond far stronger than words. The following days brought more changes. Alice, once a woman without hope, now stood as a symbol of resilience and strength for the Cheyenne. She became an active participant in the community, helping with tasks that were once beyond her reach. She worked alongside the women of the tribe, preparing food, mending clothes, and even learning to make the intricate beadwork that the Cheyenne were known for. Dakotah watched her progress with quiet pride. It was not just her transformation that moved him, but her unrelenting spirit. She had proven that even in the face of unimaginable odds, one could rise and make a new life, one step at a time. As the seasons changed and the land bloomed with new life, Alice stood taller than ever. She was no longer the timid woman who had once arrived in silence. She had become Wiaya, the one who overcame. The name was no longer just a symbol. It was a reflection of the journey she had taken. And as Dakotah watched her, he knew that the bond they shared would last for a lifetime. A bond forged not just in protection, but in respect, understanding, and the quiet strength of the human spirit. The days in the Cheyenne camp passed slowly, and Alice began to feel more at home with each new sunrise. The tribe, once a distant and unfamiliar group of people, had become her family. They no longer saw her as the blind and mute woman who had been abandoned and cast aside. Alice had found her place among them, her strength becoming a symbol for others, especially the younger members of the tribe. Dakotah, who had once been her protector, now stood by her side as a friend and mentor, teaching her the ways of the land and the people with the quiet wisdom he had earned through years of experience. One evening, as the sky turned a brilliant shade of orange and the campfire crackled softly, Dakotah called Alice over. She was working with the women, grinding corn with a stone, but she paused at his gesture, her heart quickening in anticipation. As she approached, Dakotah stood tall, his eyes reflecting the last light of the day. "Alice," he said, his voice low but clear, "I have been asked by the elders to take you to the council tomorrow." Alice felt a wave of nervousness wash over her, but she didn't show it. She had come to understand that the Cheyenne people were a proud and honorable group, and to be called to the council was an important honor. It meant that the tribe recognized her not just as a member, but as someone of value. Still, the thought of standing before the elders and speaking without words unsettled her. Dakotah placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You have nothing to fear," he said. "You have already proven yourself. Now, you will be given the chance to speak without words, and the people will listen." The next day, Alice and Dakotah walked to the central gathering place of the camp, where the elders sat in a large circle, their faces serious and focused. Alice's heart pounded in her chest as she entered the circle, feeling the eyes of the tribe upon her. The wind had picked up, and the leaves rustled around her like whispers in the wind. Dakotah stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor. The eldest of the elders, a woman with silver hair and sharp, knowing eyes, spoke first. "Weaya," she said, using the name the tribe had given Alice. "You have lived among us now for many moons. Your strength and spirit have been tested, and you have shown great courage. But we wish to hear from you. Tell us your thoughts." Alice felt a rush of emotions, fear, gratitude, hope, all swirling inside her. She took a deep breath, her fingers gripping the staff that Dakotah had given her. She had come to understand the rhythm of the world through the vibrations of the earth, and now, she focused on those familiar sensations. Slowly, she began to speak with her hands, using the signs that Dakotah had taught her, and the silence around her only deepened the meaning of her words. She spoke of her journey, of the pain of being cast aside, and the strength she had found in herself. She spoke of the tribe's wisdom, and how, despite her blindness, she had learned to see through the strength of the land, the animals, and the people. As she finished, there was no applause, no clapping. But there was something deeper, an understanding that passed through the circle. Dakotah watched with quiet pride as the elders nodded in agreement. The eldest woman spoke once more. "You have shown us that strength comes not from what we can see, but from what we believe. You have found your place among us, Weaya. You are not just a survivor. You are a leader." Alice felt a warmth in her chest at her words, a feeling she had never thought possible. She had found her voice, not in the spoken word, but in the silence of her heart, where her true strength lay. The council continued to discuss, but Alice could feel the shift. She had been accepted, not just by Dakotah, but by the entire tribe. In the days that followed, Alice found herself not just working with the women of the tribe, but also taking on a more active role in helping with decisions. She was respected, her opinions valued, and her quiet strength became an inspiration to those around her. Dakotah often sought her counsel, and though she could not speak, her thoughts were clear to him. She had become an integral part of the Cheyenne way of life, a woman who had overcome the odds, and in doing so, had transformed not only her own destiny but the destiny of those around her. The days grew warmer, and the tribe prepared for the coming of the spring. Alice had become more than just a part of the Cheyenne. She had become a symbol of the resilience and strength that lay within the heart of every person, no matter their past, no matter their circumstances. She had found her place in the world, and it was a place where she was no longer alone. As Dakotah looked at her one evening, the firelight dancing in his eyes, he knew that she had not only found her new life, but had also given new hope to the people who had once helped her find her way. As the seasons shifted and the spring rains began to wash over the land, Alice felt a quiet transformation within herself. Her life, once defined by her inability to speak or see, had become a story of courage, resilience, and acceptance. She had earned the respect of the Cheyenne people, and with each passing day, she grew more confident in her role within the tribe. Dakotah, who had once been her protector, now stood by her as an equal. Their bond had deepened, but so had her understanding of her own strength. She had learned to navigate the world around her, not by sight or sound, but through the sensations that vibrated through the earth beneath her feet, the subtle movements of the air, and the heartbeat of the land itself. Her connection with the tribe had grown into something unbreakable. One evening, as the firelight flickered in the center of the camp, Dakotah approached Alice with a serious expression on his face. He had always been a man of few words, but tonight, there was something different about his demeanor. "Alice," he said softly, his voice steady, "there is something you must understand." Alice turned toward him, her eyes not focused on him but on the warmth of the fire that danced in the distance. She had come to trust him, not just as a protector but as a guide. "The Cheyenne are preparing for a great challenge," Dakotah continued. "A threat to our people is approaching, and we need every member of the tribe to stand together." Alice's heart raced. The Cheyenne had lived through their share of trials, but this felt different. There was a heaviness in Dakotah's tone, and Alice could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on both of them. "What can I do?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. Dakotah paused for a moment, his eyes searching hers. "Your strength, Alice, is not just in surviving. It is in your spirit. You have become a leader, even without words. The tribe needs that strength now more than ever." Alice felt a surge of determination well up inside her. She had come so far, from a frightened woman abandoned by the world to a warrior in her own right. She had earned her place among the Cheyenne, and now she would prove that she belonged. The following days brought with them an air of tension. The threat Dakotah had mentioned was a group of bandits who had been raiding nearby settlements, and the Cheyenne had received word that they were moving closer. The tribe began to prepare, gathering supplies, strengthening their defenses, and strategizing their response. Alice was no longer just a spectator. She worked alongside the other women, preparing food and medicine, making sure that everyone was ready for what was to come. She had become an integral part of the tribe's daily life, and the women had begun to look to her for guidance. Even the children, who once hesitated to approach her, now sought her out, eager to learn the ways of the land and the strength that she embodied. As the sun dipped below the horizon on the eve of the confrontation, Dakotah found Alice sitting alone by the fire, her fingers tracing the smooth surface of the stone that she had come to use as a grounding tool during moments of contemplation. He sat beside her, the silence between them comfortable, a reflection of the bond they had built. "Are you ready?" Dakotah asked, his voice low. Alice nodded, her expression calm but resolute. She had learned that strength was not just in the actions one took, but in the decisions made in moments of quiet. "We stand together," she replied, her words simple, yet filled with a quiet power. The next morning, the tribe gathered at the edge of the camp, prepared for what was to come. The bandits had made their way into Cheyenne territory, and the Cheyenne warriors, led by Dakotah, were ready to defend their land. Alice stood among the women, her heart steady, her mind clear. She would not fight with weapons, but with the strength of her spirit. The battle that ensued was fierce, but the Cheyenne were prepared. Dakotah and the other warriors fought with precision and skill, while the women supported them, tending to the wounded and ensuring that the camp remained secure. Alice, though not on the front lines, played her part. She moved silently among the women, offering what help she could, ensuring that the fighters had what they needed. Her presence was a steady force, a reminder to all that the strength of the Cheyenne was not only in their warriors, but in every member of the tribe. As the battle drew to a close, the bandits were defeated, their threat neutralized. The Cheyenne had prevailed, not just through their fighting prowess, but through their unity, their strength, and their unwavering resolve. Dakotah found Alice at the edge of the camp, where she had been watching the horizon. The tension had faded, but the weight of the battle still hung in the air. He walked up to her, his expression one of quiet admiration. "You have proven your strength once more," he said, his voice filled with respect. Alice turned to him, her face calm, but her heart filled with pride. "We have proven it together," she replied. In that moment, Alice understood something profound. Strength wasn't just about fighting battles. It was about enduring, adapting, and standing firm in the face of adversity. She had found her place among the Cheyenne, and they had found a place for her in their hearts. The weeks following the battle were marked by a renewed sense of peace in the Cheyenne camp, but for Alice, the victory felt bittersweet. The land around them had been secured, and the threat of the bandits was no more. Yet as the days went by, Alice could feel a shift in the air. The tribe had celebrated their victory, but she could sense that Dakotah was troubled. There were moments when his eyes would linger on the horizon, his brow furrowed in thought, and she knew that something deeper weighed on him. One evening, after the Sun had set and the stars filled the vast expanse of the sky. Alice found herself sitting near the fire, as she often did now. She had become a part of the tribe's rhythm, her presence felt in every part of their daily life. Dakotah joined her, his steps quiet as he sat down beside her. "The land is safe for now," he began, his voice softer than usual. "But there are changes coming." Alice turned her head toward him, her fingers lightly touching the staff beside her. She could feel the tension in his words, the unspoken worry. "What changes?" she asked, using the hand signs Dakotah had taught her, her movements slow but deliberate. Dakotah paused for a moment, collecting his thoughts. "The government is pushing further into these territories," he said, his words heavy with concern. "They are looking to take control of the land, and they don't care about the people who live here. The Cheyenne, the Lakota, the others. All of us may be pushed aside." Alice could feel the weight of his words settle over her, the realization that their peaceful life might not last forever. "What can we do?" she sighed, her hands steady as she asked the question that had been haunting her own mind. Dakotah's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of uncertainty in him. "We fight," he said, his voice low, but there was no doubt in his words. "But this time, it won't be just about defending our homes. It will be about something greater. It will be about protecting the very heart of our way of life." Alice nodded. She understood. The Cheyenne had fought before, and they would fight again. But this time, it would be different. This time, the fight would be for their very existence. Over the next few days, Alice continued her work in the camp, but her mind kept returning to Dakotah's words. She had always known that the Cheyenne way of life was fragile, but now the truth was undeniable. The world was changing, and the Cheyenne people were facing the threat of losing everything. It was a cold morning when the word came. The government had sent men to take control of the land, to push the Cheyenne and other tribes from their homes. The warriors gathered at the edge of the camp, and Alice could feel the energy shift as the men prepared for battle. Dakotah stood among them, his posture strong and resolute, but there was a sadness in his eyes that Alice couldn't ignore. She had seen him in many situations, but this was different. This wasn't just a battle for land or survival. This was a fight for the future, for the very soul of the Cheyenne people. Alice knew her place in this fight. She had proven her strength, but now it was time for her to stand with her people, to fight in her own way. The days leading up to the confrontation were filled with preparations. The warriors trained, the women gathered supplies, and the children were kept safe. Dakotah spent time with Alice, teaching her how to use the tools of war, not in the sense of weapons, but in the sense of strategy. She learned how to observe, how to understand the terrain, and how to read the wind, the very things that made the Cheyenne warriors so effective. It was the eve of the battle when Alice stood outside, looking at the vast stretch of land that had been her home. The wind howled through the trees, and she could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her. This battle would not just be a test of strength, but a test of everything the Cheyenne had fought for. Dakotah approached her quietly, standing beside her without a word. They both stared out at the horizon, knowing that the coming days would change everything. "Are you ready?" Dakotah asked finally, his voice calm but filled with determination. Alice nodded. She had learned that strength wasn't just in fighting. It was in the quiet moments, the decisions made in the silence of one's heart. "We will fight together," she signed, her hands steady and strong. Dakotah turned to her, his expression softening. "Yes, together," he agreed. The battle the next day was fierce, the air thick with tension as the government soldiers advanced. The Cheyenne warriors stood their ground, but this fight was unlike any they had faced before. Alice fought alongside them, not with a weapon, but with the strength of her spirit, her presence a reminder of what they were fighting for. She stood by the women, helping to tend to the wounded, ensuring that the warriors were prepared. The Cheyenne fought fiercely, but it was not enough. The soldiers had greater numbers, and as the day wore on, it became clear that they could not hold their ground forever. As the sun set, the Cheyenne knew that they had lost, but the battle was far from over. Dakotah turned to Alice, his face grim but determined. "We will rebuild," he said quietly. "This fight is not finished. The Cheyenne will never be silenced." Alice stood tall beside him, her heart heavy with the weight of the day's loss, but filled with a quiet resolve. The Cheyenne had lost a battle, but they would never lose their spirit. In the weeks that followed the battle, the Cheyenne camp felt the weight of their loss, but Alice could sense something else within the people. There was a quiet determination in the air, a kind of resilience that could not be broken. Even though the government soldiers had taken control of their land, they had not taken their spirit. Alice had watched the warriors fight, watched Dakotah lead them with strength and honor, but she also knew that this battle had left a mark. The Cheyenne were not defeated, but they were forced to adapt. As Dakotah had promised, they would rebuild. The warriors went out to scout the surrounding areas, ensuring that no further threats loomed over them, while the women of the tribe continued to gather supplies, mend clothes, and prepare for the long winter ahead. Alice, though not a fighter, had proven her worth through her quiet strength, and now, she was taking on a new role in the rebuilding of the tribe. She spent her days working with the women, learning new skills, and offering her assistance where it was needed. She had become more than just a member of the tribe. She was a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always the possibility of a new beginning. But there were still moments of uncertainty. Dakotah had been distant in recent days, and Alice could feel the weight of the burdens he carried. He had led his people through countless battles, but this one was different. It was not just a battle for survival. It was a fight for their very identity. The Cheyenne people were facing the loss of their land, their traditions, and their way of life. One evening, Alice found Dakotah standing by the river, staring out at the water as it flowed swiftly past. The sun had set, and the darkness of the night seemed to weigh heavily on him. Alice approached silently, knowing that words were not always necessary between them. She stood beside him, her presence a quiet support. Dakotah didn't turn to look at her, but he didn't need to. "I thought we were stronger," he said quietly, his voice tinged with frustration. "I thought we could hold on to this land, to our way of life." Alice knew the pain in his words. He had given everything to protect his people, and yet they had lost. "But we are still here," Alice signed, her hand steady as she conveyed the words that carried so much meaning. "We are still Cheyenne. No one can take that away from us." Dakotah was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to face her, his expression softening. "You are right," he said quietly. "We may have lost the land, but we have not lost who we are." The words were simple, but they held a deep truth. The Cheyenne had always survived through their unity, their strength, and their connection to the land, but it was more than that. It was the spirit that ran through their people, the stories passed down from generation to generation, the knowledge that no matter the hardships they faced, they would always find a way to persevere. Alice felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had not given up, even when it felt as though everything was slipping away. She had stood by the Cheyenne through the toughest of times, and she would continue to stand with them now. As the days grew colder and the winds of winter began to sweep through the plains, the Cheyenne worked together to rebuild what they had lost. They hunted, fished, and gathered, preparing for the harsh months ahead. Alice, though not a warrior, had found a place in this new world, one where her strength was valued, and where her spirit could continue to guide those around her. Dakotah, though still burdened with the weight of leadership, found comfort in her presence. She was his anchor, a reminder of why he fought so fiercely for his people. One evening, as the tribe gathered around the fire, Dakotah spoke to them, his voice strong and steady. "We may have lost our land," he said, his gaze sweeping over the group, "but we have not lost our hearts. We are Cheyenne, and we will continue to live as Cheyenne, no matter where we are. Together, we are unbreakable." The tribe cheered, their voices rising in unity. Alice felt a sense of pride swell in her chest. She had found her place not just among the Cheyenne, but within the very heart of their people. As the fire crackled and the night stretched out before them, Alice knew that while the road ahead would be long, the Cheyenne would never give up. They would rebuild, they would endure, and they would always fight for their identity. And Alice, the woman who had once been abandoned and cast aside, would fight beside them, not as an outsider, but as one of their own. The winter months came harsh and cold to the Cheyenne camp. The wind howled through the trees, and the snow piled high, creating a blanket that covered the land in silence. Yet despite the bitter cold, there was a warmth in the hearts of the people, a sense of unity that had only grown stronger with the passing of time. Alice, now fully integrated into the life of the tribe, felt more at home than ever. Her days were spent working alongside the women, preparing food, mending clothes, and weaving the intricate beadwork that was so important to the Cheyenne people. But despite the peace, Alice knew that their fight was not over. The government still loomed as a distant but constant threat. Dakotah had made it clear that their survival depended on more than just their ability to live off the land. It was their ability to adapt, to keep fighting for what they believed in, that would determine their future. One evening, as the fire burned low and the stars shone bright in the clear sky, Dakotah called for Alice. She had become accustomed to these quiet moments with him, where words were few but meaning was abundant. As she approached him, she saw the same weight of concern in his eyes that she had seen before. "Alice," he said, his voice soft but steady. "There are whispers of the soldiers coming back. They're sending more men to push us further. Our people need to prepare." Alice felt a knot form in her stomach. The last fight had left its scars, and the thought of more conflict was a heavy burden to bear. But she knew that Dakotah was right. The Cheyenne could not afford to let their guard down. "What can we do?" Alice signed, her hands moving in fluid gestures that had become second nature. Dakotah looked at her, his face solemn. "We must make sure our warriors are ready, and the women are prepared to protect what is ours. We can't let them take our spirit, Alice. Not now, not ever." The weight of his words lingered in the cold air. Alice nodded, her mind already racing with the many ways she could help. She had become more than just a part of the community. She had become a vital part of their strength. As the days passed, the tribe began to prepare for the possibility of another fight. Dakotah led the warriors in their training, making sure that they were ready for whatever would come. Alice worked alongside the women, gathering supplies, tending to the children, and reinforcing their defenses. Her strength had become a beacon to the tribe, a reminder that they were not alone, that no matter what happened, they would stand together. Then, one cold morning, the scouts returned with news. The soldiers were indeed moving in, but they had underestimated the strength of the Cheyenne. The warriors were ready, and the tribe had fortified their camp, making it clear that they would not go down without a fight. Dakotah, who had grown even more solemn with the news, gathered the tribe together. Alice stood among them, her heart racing as she felt the energy of the moment. This was not just another battle. It was a fight for everything they had fought for. "The time has come," Dakotah said, his voice carrying across the camp. "We will not allow them to take what is ours. We will fight for our land, our people, and our way of life. Together, we are stronger than any enemy." Alice could feel the power of his words, the fire that had been reignited in the hearts of the Cheyenne. They had lost battles before, but they had never lost their spirit. As the warriors prepared for battle, Alice and the women took their place. The men would fight on the front lines, but the women knew that their role was just as important. They would tend to the wounded, protect the children, and ensure that the tribe's legacy would continue. The battle was fierce, but the Cheyenne stood firm. They fought with everything they had, using the land to their advantage, moving swiftly and strategically. The soldiers, unprepared for the strength of the Cheyenne, began to falter. The Cheyenne warriors fought not just for their homes, but for their identity, for the very soul of their people. Dakotah fought at the front, his presence like a shadow among the warriors. Alice could feel his determination, his strength, even from a distance. She knew that no matter what happened, they would not give up. As the day wore on, the soldiers began to retreat, their confidence shattered by the unexpected resilience of the Cheyenne. The battle was won, but Alice knew that this victory was just another chapter in a long and difficult story. The Cheyenne had proven once again that their spirit could not be broken, but they also knew that the road ahead would be long. As the warriors returned to camp, tired but victorious, Dakotah approached Alice. His face was still hardened from the battle, but his eyes held something softer now, gratitude, respect. "We did it," he said quietly, his voice filled with pride. Alice nodded, her heart swelling with pride as well. "Together," she signed, her hands steady. "We are unbreakable." Dakotah smiled faintly, his gaze never leaving hers. "Yes, together," he agreed. As the camp settled into the calm after the storm, Alice knew that the Cheyenne people had once again proven their strength. They had fought for their future, and though the battle was over, their journey was far from finished. The road ahead would be full of challenges, but Alice had no doubt that they would face them, not as a tribe of survivors, but as a tribe of warriors who would never stop fighting for what they believed in. As the days passed, the Cheyenne camp began to find its rhythm once again. The victory over the soldiers had been hard-fought, but it had reinforced the belief that their strength lay in their unity. Alice, now firmly embedded in the tribe, felt the weight of what had transpired. The battle was won, but there were still unresolved questions. How long could they hold their ground? How much longer could they survive the pressure from the outside world? Dakotah, who had been her rock since the moment they first met, continued to stand strong, but Alice could sense that something had changed within him. He had always been a man of few words, but now there was an even deeper silence. She saw it in the way he looked out over the land, his gaze distant, as though the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. One evening, Alice found him sitting by the river, the same spot where they had spoken before the last battle. She approached him quietly, her steps soft on the ground. The night air was cold, and the stars shone brightly overhead. Dakotah did not turn when she approached, but knew she was there. "You've been quiet," Alice signed, her fingers moving slowly but with intent. Dakotah let out a long breath, his eyes still fixed on the water. "I've been thinking," he said after a long pause. "The soldiers are gone, but their presence remains. The government will come for us again. We cannot hide forever." Alice felt the familiar knot in her stomach tighten. She had known that their fight for survival was far from over, but hearing Dakotah's words made it all the more real. "What will we do?" she signed, the uncertainty of the future creeping into her thoughts. Dakotah turned to her then, his face softening in the moonlight. "We fight, but it will be different this time," he said. "We will not just defend our land. We will fight for our future. The world is changing, Alice, and we must change with it." His words hung in the air, filled with the weight of their truth. Alice could feel his resolve, but she could also feel his burden. He had always been the one to lead the charge, to take the weight of the tribe's survival on his shoulders. But now, there was a quiet plea in his eyes, a recognition that even the strongest could not carry everything alone. Alice, who had learned to fight in her own way, knew that this was her moment to step forward. She had already proven her strength by standing beside Dakotah, by standing with the Cheyenne. But now, she had to prove it again, not just for her, but for the people who had given her a new life. The next few days were filled with planning and preparation. The Cheyenne knew that they had to act quickly. The government was encroaching further into their lands, and they would not hesitate to take more if given the chance. Dakotah, along with the warriors, strategized, while Alice worked alongside the women to prepare. They gathered food, medicine, and supplies, and reinforced their defenses. Alice's presence was a constant reminder that the Cheyenne were not simply survivors, they were fighters. She wasn't just contributing in a practical sense. She was embodying the spirit of the tribe. Her actions, her steady hands, her unwavering resolve in the face of uncertainty. These were the qualities that Dakotah needed, and these were the qualities that the Cheyenne needed to endure what was coming. On the eve of the next confrontation, the camp was unusually quiet. The warriors gathered in the center, their faces grim but determined. Dakotah stood at the front, his eyes scanning the horizon, while Alice stood beside him, her presence a silent force of strength. "Tomorrow," Dakotah said to the warriors, "we will face the enemy, but we will face them as Cheyenne, as one people. We fight not just for our land, but for our future, for our children, and for the legacy of our people." The warriors nodded in agreement, their eyes filled with purpose. Alice, standing beside Dakotah, felt the weight of the moment. The battle would be hard, and there were no guarantees of victory. But there was something more important than winning. The belief that they could endure, that they could remain true to themselves no matter what the world tried to take from them. The next day, the soldiers arrived, and the Cheyenne stood firm. The battle that ensued was fierce, but the Cheyenne fought with everything they had, using the terrain, the land they had always known, to their advantage. Dakotah led the charge, but Alice was right there with him, working with the women to ensure that the fighters were prepared, that the wounded were cared for, and that the children were kept safe. The warriors fought fiercely, but as the day wore on, it became clear that they could not hold their ground forever. The soldiers were relentless, their numbers overwhelming. But Dakotah's words rang in Alice's mind. This was not just a fight for survival. It was a fight for their future. In the end, the The Cheyenne were forced to retreat, but they did so with dignity. They had fought not just to survive, but to preserve their way of life, to protect what was most precious to them. As Dakotah stood at the edge of the camp, watching the soldiers retreat, Alice approached him, her hands steady as she signed, "We will rebuild." Dakotah turned to her, his face tired but resolute. "Yes," he said softly. "Together, we will rebuild." And as they stood there, watching the remnants of the battle fade into the distance, Alice knew that while the Cheyenne had lost this battle, their spirit would never be broken. The days following the retreat were marked by a quiet sense of exhaustion, but also a growing determination. The Cheyenne had been forced to abandon their immediate hold on the land, but they had not abandoned their spirit. The soldiers may have had the upper hand in the battle, but the Cheyenne were resilient, and Alice could feel that resilience every day. As the warriors returned to camp, they were tired, battered, but not broken. Dakotah, as always, led them with quiet strength, his face etched with the marks of leadership, but it was the silence in his eyes that Alice couldn't ignore. They had lost, but they had not been defeated. The Cheyenne gathered once more in the center of the camp. The women, led by Alice, prepared food, tended to the injured, and ensured that the warriors had everything they needed for their next steps. Despite the uncertainty of the future, there was a sense of unity, an unspoken bond that held the people together. The tribe was not just surviving. They were living, they were thriving in their way, and that meant something. One evening, Dakotah called Alice to meet him by the river again. She had grown accustomed to these moments with him. Simple, quiet times where they didn't need words to understand each other. He had always been the leader of the warriors, but now, it seemed, his burden had grown heavier. He looked out at the flowing water, his posture still and solid, like the land itself. "Alice," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, "the world is changing faster than we can adapt. We've lost our land, we've lost battles, but we have not lost our will. But what happens when they come again?" Alice watched him carefully, feeling the weight of his question in her own chest. The future seemed uncertain, but she knew what Dakotah was asking. It wasn't just about land or soldiers. It was about something much deeper, the soul of their people. "We stand," Alice signed, her hands steady, her heart sure. "We stand together, no matter what comes." Dakotah turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting hers. There was a flicker of something in his gaze, recognition, perhaps. The strength he had always seen in her, the strength she had found in herself, had come to embody the spirit of the Cheyenne. "Yes," he replied, a soft smile tugging at his lips. Together, as the days turned into weeks, the Cheyenne began to rebuild, not just their camp, but their resolve. Dakotah and the warriors went on scouting missions, looking for signs of the approaching soldiers. Meanwhile, Alice worked tirelessly with the women, ensuring that everything was ready, that no detail was left unprepared. She had become an integral part of the tribe's strength, her hands steady in their work, her heart strong in the face of uncertainty. But Alice knew that the time for rebuilding was drawing to a close. The Cheyenne could no longer stay hidden. They had to find a way to fight not just for survival, but for their future. The land, their history, their way of life, they could not let it be taken from them. It was one of those quiet evenings when Dakotah gathered the warriors and the elders once more. Alice stood among the women, her heart steady as she listened to the discussions unfolding before her. The warriors, though weary, were sharp, their eyes focused on the task at hand. "We fight once more," Dakotah said, his voice carrying across the camp. "This time, we fight with everything we have, but we fight on our terms." The warriors nodded in agreement, their faces filled with determination. Alice felt the power of Dakotah's words, the fire that had been reignited in the hearts of the Cheyenne. She had seen the strength in Dakotah, but now she saw something more, a plan, a way forward, and a unity that no force could break. The plan was simple, but it would require the full strength of the tribe. The warriors would engage the soldiers head-on, but they would use the land to their advantage. The women, led by Alice, would be tasked with ensuring the safety of the children, providing support where needed, and using their knowledge of the terrain to outmaneuver the enemy. The Cheyenne would use their resources, their connection to the land, to fight back. And this time, they would not fight alone. They would fight as one. The next day, the warriors set out, their horses kicking up the dust of the plains. Alice stood among the women, watching them prepare. The camp was silent except for the sounds of hooves and the distant calls of birds. There was no fear in the women's eyes. There was only resolve. "We are Cheyenne," Alice signed, her hands steady. "And we will not be broken." Dakotah, standing beside her, gave a small nod, a quiet affirmation of their shared belief. The warriors rode out, and the women followed, prepared for the long road ahead. The battle, when it came, was unlike anything they had faced before. The soldiers, expecting a quick victory, were taken by surprise. The Cheyenne used every bit of knowledge they had, every hill, every tree, every hidden valley, to their advantage. Dakotah fought with unmatched skill, but it was the unity of the Cheyenne that turned the tide. They had lost battles, but they had never lost their spirit. The fight for their future was not over, but with each passing moment, Alice could feel the strength of the Cheyenne growing, their bond unbreakable. The warriors returned victorious, and though the battle had been won, Alice knew that this was only the beginning. The Cheyenne would continue to fight, to stand, and to live as they always had, together. The Cheyenne had won the battle, but the victory felt different than the others. There was no celebration, no loud cheers or dancing around the fire. Instead, there was a quiet, shared understanding among the tribe that this fight was only one of many to come. As Dakotah stood among his people, his eyes scanning the horizon, he could feel the weight of what lay ahead. The world outside their camp was shifting, and while they had managed to hold their ground, it was clear that the Cheyenne could not stay hidden forever. Alice, standing beside him, understood the unspoken truth that had settled over them both. There was still much work to be done. The land they fought for was no longer just a piece of earth. It was the very heart of their people. Dakotah turned to Alice, his face grim but resolute. "We must prepare for the next wave," he said quietly. "The soldiers will return, and they will come in greater numbers. We cannot afford to wait." Alice nodded, her fingers moving to sign the words. "We stand together. We fight for everything. Our land, our people, our future." Dakotah's eyes softened as he watched her. In her, he saw the strength of the Cheyenne, unyielding, determined, and bound by a fierce love for their people. It was that strength that had driven them both through the hardships they had faced, and it was that strength that would carry them forward. The Cheyenne tribe set to work immediately, knowing that every moment was precious. Dakotah called upon his warriors, and the men and women of the tribe gathered to reinforce their defenses. They built new barriers, dug trenches, and used the land to their advantage, preparing for the inevitable battle to come. Alice, though not a warrior, played a crucial role in the tribe's preparation. She worked with the women, organizing supplies, ensuring that the sick and elderly were cared for, and tending to the children who would be kept safe during the fight. The bond between Alice and the Cheyenne people had only deepened over time. She was no longer just the silent outsider. She had become a leader, a symbol of the tribe's resilience, and a force in their ongoing fight for survival. As the days passed, Dakotah spent more time in quiet reflection, strategizing with the elders, ensuring that their movements would be swift and coordinated. He knew that the soldiers would not be easy to defeat. They had greater numbers and more advanced weaponry. But the Cheyenne had something that could not be measured, an unbreakable will and a deep connection to the land that had sustained them for generations. The time came sooner than expected. A scout brought word that the soldiers were advancing faster than anticipated. The tribe gathered in the center of the camp, the tension palpable. Dakotah addressed them, his voice firm but filled with purpose. "We fight for our future. We fight to keep our people safe. We fight for what is ours." The warriors mounted their horses, ready for battle. Alice, though not armed, stood beside Dakotah, her eyes steady. She knew what was at stake. The land, the people, the legacy of the Cheyenne, all of it rested on their shoulders. The battle that ensued was brutal. The soldiers, confident in their numbers, were unprepared for the guerrilla tactics that the Cheyenne employed. Dakotah and the warriors used the terrain to their advantage, striking swiftly and retreating into the hills, only to strike again. Alice, along with the women, worked tirelessly, tending to the wounded, keeping the camp organized, and ensuring that the tribe had what they needed to continue the fight. Hours passed, and the battle seemed to stretch endlessly. The Cheyenne warriors fought with unmatched courage, but it was clear that the soldiers were relentless. Dakotah, leading the charge, fought bravely at the front, but the tide of the battle was turning. The warriors, though fierce, were starting to tire. The soldiers' numbers were overwhelming, and despite their best efforts, the Cheyenne could not hold them off forever. As the sun began to set, Dakotah called for a retreat. The warriors, though wounded and weary, fought their way back to the camp, but the soldiers pursued. Alice stood at the edge of the camp, watching as the warriors made their way back. She could feel the weight of the moment, the loss, the exhaustion, the uncertainty of what would come next. Dakotah returned to the camp, his face bloodied but resolute. He found Alice standing near the fire, her eyes filled with worry. "We fought with everything we had," Dakotah said, his voice heavy. But it wasn't enough. Alice signed the words that were now firmly in her heart. "We are not finished. We will rebuild. Together." Dakotah looked at her, a faint smile crossing his lips. "Yes," he said, his voice strong despite the defeat. "Together. The battle may have been lost, but the fight for the Cheyenne's future was far from over. The soldiers might have pushed them back, but they could never take away the strength of the Cheyenne people." As the night settled over the camp, Alice knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but she also knew that as long as they stood together, there was nothing they couldn't overcome. The days that followed the retreat were heavy with uncertainty. The warriors, though strong and skilled, had faced overwhelming numbers, and the soldiers were relentless. But the Cheyenne were not a people to be easily crushed, and Alice could feel the quiet, burning resolve in the air as the camp began. To regroup, Dakotah, as always, was at the heart of the tribe's efforts to rebuild. His leadership had been steadfast, even in the face of adversity, and though the battle had been lost, his determination never wavered. He spent his days meeting with the elders, planning their next move, while the warriors recovered and began to train once again. But even Dakotah knew that the Cheyenne could not continue to fight forever. The pressure from the outside world was growing stronger with each passing day, and the soldiers would undoubtedly return. Alice, who had stood by him through so much, knew that the coming days would be filled with difficult choices. It was one quiet morning when Dakotah called for a meeting with the entire tribe. Alice, along with the women, gathered around the fire, watching as the warriors assembled. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. They all knew that Dakotah had something important to say. When the firelight flickered in the stillness of the morning, Dakotah stood before them, his face hard as stone. "We cannot keep running," he said, his voice steady but filled with an undeniable gravity. "The soldiers will continue to come, and we will not be able to protect our land if we do not act. We must find another way." The words hung in the air like a heavy storm cloud. Alice watched him, feeling the weight of his declaration settle over the group. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about making a stand, one that would define the future of the Cheyenne people. "What do you propose?" one of the elders asked, his voice full of cautious curiosity. Dakotah looked around the camp, his eyes meeting Alice's for a brief moment. There was something unspoken in that glance, a shared understanding that whatever came next, they would face it together. "We will not fight a war we cannot win," Dakotah said, his tone quiet but resolute. "Instead, we will fight for something else. We will fight for our people's future. We will find a new home, a place where we can live in peace, free from the constant threat of violence. But to do this, we must leave the land we've always known." The words landed heavily in the camp. The Cheyenne had always been tied to the land, to the earth that had nourished and sustained them for generations. For many, the idea of leaving it behind was a painful and unthinkable decision. Alice, who had felt the deep connection to the land as strongly as anyone, understood the weight of what Dakotah was asking. But she also understood that their survival depended on finding a way forward. It wasn't just about defending the land. It was about preserving the life of the people. The Cheyenne were more than their land. They were a people bound by spirit and by the strength of their ancestors. The decision was made. The tribe would leave their homeland behind and venture into unknown territory. Dakotah led them, guiding the warriors, the women, and the children to a place they hoped would offer them peace and a chance to rebuild. But the journey was not easy. The days were long and the path uncertain. The weather turned cold as winter settled in, and the challenges of the road were many. Yet, Despite the hardships, there was a sense of unity in the camp. The Cheyenne were on the move, and though the future was unclear, they knew that they had made the right choice. Alice worked alongside the women, her hands steady as she helped tend to the sick and the elderly. She had become an integral part of the tribe, not just because of her strength, but because of the wisdom she had gained in the time she had spent with them. She was no longer the quiet, blind woman who had arrived with nothing. She was Alice, a symbol of resilience and of the spirit that would carry the Cheyenne forward. One evening, as the camp settled for the night, Dakotah approached her again, his expression softened by the flickering light of the fire. He had become more than a leader to Alice. He had become a friend, someone she could rely on in the toughest of times. "You've done more than anyone could ask," he said quietly, his voice filled with a deep respect. "I never imagined we would come this far. But we've done it together, and we will continue to do so." Alice signed the words in response, her hands steady and sure. "Together, we are unbreakable." Dakotah nodded, his eyes meeting hers with quiet understanding. "Yes," he said softly. "Together, we are unbreakable." The journey ahead would not be easy, but Alice knew that the Cheyenne would continue to fight, not with weapons, but with their hearts and their spirits. As long as they stood together, they would endure. And with that thought, Alice felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had lost battles, but they had never lost their way. The road ahead would be long, but they would walk it together, as a united people, bound by their shared strength and the unshakable belief that they could overcome whatever the future held. As the Cheyenne continued their journey into the unknown, the days blurred together, filled with hardship and resolve. The land they once called home was behind them, a distant memory they carried in their hearts. Yet, despite the uncertainty of the future, a new sense of purpose began to take root within the tribe. They were not just survivors, they were fighters, and together they were unbreakable. Dakotah, though weary from the burdens he had carried for so long, stood strong, leading his people with the same quiet strength that had guided them through countless trials. Alice, who had once been an outsider, now stood beside him, her presence a steady force. She had found a family in the Cheyenne, not through blood, but through shared struggle and the unspoken bond of resilience. The nights in the camp were colder now, and the journey had taken its toll. Yet, as the firelight flickered in the darkness, Alice saw something in the eyes of the Cheyenne that could not be extinguished: hope. It was the kind of hope that didn't come from promises of victory, but from the knowledge that they were still standing, still fighting, and still moving forward. The journey was long, but they had learned to adapt, to live off the land, and to rely on each other. The warriors grew stronger with every passing day, training in preparation for whatever would come next. Dakotah led them, never faltering, never giving up. And the women, led by Alice, continued to nurture the camp, ensuring that the children were safe and that the wounded were cared for. Alice had found her purpose, not as a passive observer, but as an active participant in the tribe's survival. She had become a leader in her own right, her strength and spirit a guiding light for those around her. One evening, as the tribe gathered around the fire, Dakotah spoke to them, his voice steady and filled with quiet pride. "We have faced loss," he said, his gaze sweeping over the gathered people, "but we have not lost our spirit. The world may try to break us, but we are Cheyenne, and we will continue to live, to fight, and to thrive." The warriors nodded, their eyes filled with the same unbreakable determination. The women, too, stood tall, their resolve as strong as the men's. Alice felt the power of Dakotah's words fill the air. The Cheyenne were not just a people of the past, they were a people of the future. The world had changed, but their spirit remained the same. They would endure. As the fire crackled and the stars sparkled above, Alice found herself standing at the edge of the camp, gazing out at the vast horizon. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. She had found her place, not just in the Cheyenne tribe, but in the world. She had fought for her survival, for her people, and for her future. And she had found strength in that fight, strength that she had never known she possessed. Dakotah came to stand beside her, his presence a quiet support. "We've made it this far," he said, his voice low but filled with conviction. "We'll make it further." Alice nodded, her heart swelling with pride. "Together," she signed, her hands steady. "Together, "We are unbreakable." Dakotah smiled, his face softening. "Yes, together." And as the camp settled into the quiet of the night, Alice knew that no matter what the future held, the Cheyenne would endure. They had faced loss, but they had never lost their way. They had faced battle, but they had never lost their spirit. And as long as they stood together, as long as they fought for each other, they would remain unbreakable. The Cheyenne's journey was far from over, but Alice knew that they would continue to fight, to survive, and to live together. In this captivating tale of survival and strength, Alice, a blind and mute woman, finds herself thrust into the unforgiving world of the Cheyenne tribe. As they face threats from outside forces and the harshness of their environment, Alice becomes a symbol of resilience and courage. In the heart of this gripping story, readers will experience a blend of traditional Western stories and timeless themes of unity, survival, and personal transformation. The Cheyenne tribe, led by the unwavering Dakotah, must navigate their future while holding onto the traditions that have defined them for generations. As Alice bonds with the tribe, she proves that strength comes not from physical abilities, but from the unshakable spirit within. As the tribe moves through adversity, the deep connections they form make their survival possible. With every battle, every challenge, and every triumph, these Western stories unfold, highlighting the perseverance of the human spirit. Alice's journey is one of self-discovery, a journey that will resonate with anyone who has ever fought against the odds. These Western stories remind us all that even in the darkest times, hope can be found in unity, resilience, and the fight for a better future. With every twist and turn, the Cheyenne and Alice's unwavering determination lead them through unimaginable struggles. Join the tribe in this inspiring narrative, where love, sacrifice, and survival come together in a world that celebrates the best of Western stories. From start to finish, this tale captures the essence of what it means to endure, adapt, and fight for survival in the face of overwhelming odds, making it a must-read for fans of Western stories.